It started as a routine traffic stop on a quiet Tuesday morning in Dayton, Ohio. It ended with a decorated war hero lying face down on the asphalt, his wheelchair tossed aside like garbage. Officer Cliff Miller thought he was untouchable. He thought his badge gave him the right to be judge, jury, and executioner. He thought he could bury the footage. He was wrong. What you are about to hear is the true, terrifying timeline of how one man's arrogance destroyed his life, and how a paralyzed veteran's quiet dignity brought an entire corrupt precinct to its knees. This isn't just a story about police brutality. It's a story about the most satisfying, brutal karma you will ever witness. 20 years in prison was just the beginning. The humidity in Ohio that morning was oppressive, the kind that sticks your shirt to your back the moment you step outside. But inside, his modified 2018 Ford Explorer, Isaiah Zeke Washington, was cool. The air conditioning was humming, and the jazz station was playing a low, mournful saxophone solo that reminded him of nights in Frankfurt before the deployment that changed everything. Isaiah was 42, though his eyes looked 60. He was a man carved from granite and grief, a retired staff sergeant with the 101st Airborne. He had left his legs in a dusty ravine in the Kunar province of Afghanistan 15 years ago. An IED had taken his mobility, but it hadn't taken his pride. He sat in the driver's seat, his hands resting on the custom hand controls installed by the VA. On the passenger seat beside him sat a crisp, white envelope containing a loan application for his non-profit, Veterans for Valley View. He was on his way to the bank. He was 5 minutes early. He was always early, 3 blocks away. Officer Cliff Miller was already having a bad day. Miller was 34, a man who wore his uniform a little too tight, emphasizing biceps built in the department gym rather than on the job. He had been on the force for 8 years, long enough to lose his rookie optimism, but not long enough to earn the genuine respect of the old-timers. Miller was a stats guy. He cared about arrest numbers, ticket quotas, and the adrenaline rush of a takedown. He viewed the citizens of District 4 not as people he swore to protect, but as potential infractions walking on 2 legs. Miller sat in his cruiser, scrolling through his phone, ignoring the dispatch chatter until a specific description caught his eye. A bolo be on the lookout had been issued 2 days prior for a suspect involved in a liquor store robbery, black male, driving a dark SUV as Isaiah's black Ford Explorer rolled slowly through the stop sign at Elm and 4th, pausing for a full 3 seconds. Exactly as the law required, Miller looked up. He saw a dark skin tone. He saw a dark SUV. He didn't see the handicap placard hanging from the rearview mirror. He didn't see the Purple Heart Combat Wounded bumper sticker. He saw a target. Miller flipped the lights. Whoop, whoop! Isaiah sighed, his heart rate barely ticking up. He checked his mirrors. He saw the flashing blues and reds. He knew the drill. He signaled right, pulled over slowly to a safe spot, away from the flow of traffic, and put the car in park. He lowered the window. Because of his paralysis, Isaiah couldn't easily access his wallet if it was in his back pocket, so he kept his license and registration clipped to the sun visor. He placed both hands clearly on the top of the steering wheel, fingers spread. He waited. Miller approached the vehicle with his hand already resting on the grip of his Glock 19. His body cam was blinking red recording. But in Miller's mind, the camera was just a formality, a piece of plastic he could explain away later. Driver's license and registration, Miller barked, not even leaning down to the window. He stood back, behind the B-pillar, a tactical position, "Good morning, officer," Isaiah said, his voice deep and calm. "My name is Isaiah Washington. I am a paraplegic. My legs do not work. My license is clipped to the visor above my head. I am going to reach for it now. Is that all right?" It was a textbook disclosure. Polite, informative, safe. But Cliff Miller wasn't listening to the words. He was listening to the adrenaline pumping in his own ears. He saw a man who fit a description. He saw a man reaching up. "Keep your hands on the wheel," Miller shouted, his voice cracking with sudden, manufactured intensity. Isaiah froze. "Officer, I am just telling you. I said keep your hands on the wheel. Do not reach for anything." Miller unholstered his weapon, pointing it at the floorboard but ready to raise it. "My hands are on the wheel," Isaiah said, slowly placing them back at the 10 and 2 positions. "I am paralyzed. I cannot step out of the car. I need to get my ID." "Get out of the car," Miller commanded. The logic of the request didn't register. He was in a power struggle now. If he backed down, he lost. If he escalated, he won. That was how Miller's world worked. "Officer," Isaiah said, turning his head slowly to look Miller in the eye, "I literally cannot. My wheelchair is in the back. If you open the back hatch, the lift will lower it." Miller sneered. "I'm not your valet. I told you to step out of the vehicle. I smell marijuana." There was no marijuana. Isaiah hadn't smoked a day in his life. It was the oldest lie in the book, the universal pass for probable cause. "There is no marijuana in this car. Officer, I am a disabled veteran. Please, call your supervisor." That was the trigger. Call your supervisor. To a man like Cliff Miller, that wasn't a request. It was an insult to his authority. It was a challenge, and Cliff Miller never backed down from a challenge. "Open the door," Miller hissed, holstering his gun but reaching for his taser. "Last warning." Isaiah shook his head, a mix of disbelief and weary fear beginning to rise. "I can open the door, but I cannot get out." Isaiah unlocked the door. Miller ripped it open. The world inside the car was a sanctuary of controlled environment, leather seats, cool air, safety. The world outside was hot asphalt and Miller's rage. "Get out!" Miller screamed. He reached in, grabbing Isaiah by the left arm and the collar of his shirt. "I can't walk! I can't walk!" Isaiah yelled, his voice finally breaking the calm barrier. "Look at my legs. Look at the controls." Miller didn't look. He yanked. The physics of the human body are unforgiving. Without the use of his core or leg muscles to stabilize himself, Isaiah was dead weight. When Miller pulled, Isaiah didn't step out. He toppled. It happened in slow motion. Isaiah's upper body surged forward, his seatbelt, which he had unbuckled at Miller's screaming insistence moments prior, failing to hold him. He fell from the height of the SUV's seat. His shoulder hit the door frame with a sickening thud, and then he hit the ground. Smack! Isaiah's face collided with the gritty, oil-stained pavement. His legs, useless and atrophied, tangled in the door jamb before flopping out onto the road like broken dolls. Pain, white-hot and blinding, shot through his shoulder and neck. He gasped, inhaling dust and gravel. "Stop resisting," Miller roared, dropping a knee into the small of Isaiah's back. I'm not resisting." Isaiah wheezed, spit and blood bubbling on his lips. "I'm paralyzed. You son of a bitch! I'm paralyzed." Miller was breathing heavy, the sweat stinging his eyes. He looked down. He finally really looked. He saw the legs. They were thin, far thinner than the upper body. They lay at unnatural angles. The expensive dress slacks twisted. He looked up at the car. He saw the hand controls the silver levers attached to the steering column. He saw the wheelchair folded in the back, visible through the rear window. A cold pit formed in Miller's stomach. It wasn't guilt, it was calculation. He messed up, but Cliff Miller knew how to fix mess-ups. He had done it before. You control the narrative. You control the evidence. "You reached for my belt," Miller shouted, loud enough for his body cam microphone to pick up clearly. "Stop reaching for my weapon! I can't move!" Isaiah cried out, his face pressed into the dirt. "I can't feel my hands!" Miller grabbed Isaiah's wrists and cuffed them behind his back, wrenching the shoulders tight. Isaiah screamed a raw, guttural sound of agony. The fall had dislocated his right shoulder. The cuffing was grinding the bone against the socket. "Suspect secured," Miller said into his radio, his voice eerily steady. "Resisting arrest, possible assault on an officer, send backup and a bus, suspect claims injury." Claims injury. Miller stood up, looming over the man he had just broken. He looked around. The street was empty. No witnesses, just the birds and the hum of the engine. He tapped his body camera. 2 taps. Then, he did something that would seal his fate, though he didn't know it yet. He leaned down close to Isaiah's ear. "You listened to me," Miller whispered. "You fell. You tried to fight me. And you fell. If you say anything else, I'll find something in that car that puts you away for 10 years. I'll find a kilo of whatever I want to find. Do you understand me, hero?" Isaiah lay in the dirt, the vibrations of the idling engine humming through the ground into his cheek. He closed his eyes. He didn't answer. He was praying, not for salvation. He was praying that the camera was running. But Miller reached up to his chest and held the power button on the Axon body camera. The little red light blinked once, then went dark. Miller smiled. He thought he had erased the last 30 seconds. He thought he was safe. What Officer Miller didn't know was that the new batch of body cameras issued to the department 3 weeks ago had a feature called Pre-Event Buffer. They recorded video, but not audio, for 2 minutes before activation, and they continued to buffer video for 60 seconds after manual shutoff to prevent accidental power downs during struggles. Miller had turned off the light, but the eye was still watching, and across the street, in the second-story window of a brick apartment building, a 14-year-old girl named Sarah Jenkins was holding her iPhone, recording everything through the blinds. The sirens wailed in the distance, getting louder. The cavalry was coming, but they weren't coming to save Isaiah. They were coming to reinforce the lie. The ambulance ride to St. Jude's Medical Center was a blur of bumps and sharp pains for Isaiah Washington. He was strapped to a gurney, a cervical collar digging into his jawline, his wrists still handcuffed in front of him now, the metal biting into his skin with every pothole the ambulance hit. Officer Cliff Miller followed in his cruiser. The lights off, driving with the casual indifference of a man who was simply finishing a shift. Inside the ambulance, the paramedic, a young woman named Chloe, looked at the handcuffs on the paralyzed man with confusion. "Officer!" She had shouted out the back doors before they loaded him. "Is this necessary? He has no motor function below T4. He's not going anywhere." Miller had simply chewed his gum and stared at her through his polarized Oakleys. "Policy, ma'am. Suspect is non-compliant and combative. Just drive." Combative. The word bounced around Isaiah's skull like a ricocheting bullet. He lay staring at the ceiling of the ambulance, tears of frustration leaking from the corners of his eyes, pooling in his ears. It wasn't the physical pain of the dislocated shoulder that broke him. He had endured worse in the Kandahar Valley. It was the helplessness, the absolute, crushing weight of having his dignity stripped away on the side of a road he had paid taxes to pave, by a man whose salary he helped pay. When they arrived at the ER, the spectacle continued. Miller marched in alongside the gurney, hand resting on his belt, announcing to the triage nurse that this was a custodial admission. Isaiah was wheeled into a trauma bay. The doctors went to work, cutting off his shirt, his favorite button-down, the one Ruth had ironed for him that morning. "Shoulder is definitely out. Dr. Evans," the attending physician muttered, checking the X-rays on the monitor. He looked down at Isaiah. "Mr. Washington, we need to reduce this shoulder. It's going to hurt." "I know," Isaiah whispered, his voice raspy. "Just do it, officer." "Doctor." Evans turned to Miller, who was leaning against the doorframe, texting. "I need you to remove the cuffs. I can't maneuver his arm properly." Miller didn't look up from his phone. "Can't do that. Doc, he's a flight risk." Dr. Evans, a man who had seen his share of nonsense in the ER, slammed his clipboard onto the counter. The noise made Miller jump. "He is a paraplegic with a dislocated shoulder." "Doctor," Evans roared, the exhaustion of a 12-hour shift boiling over. "If he flies away, I'll catch him myself. Take the damn cuffs off, or I'm calling the chief of medicine and the press." Miller glared, his jaw tightening. He hated being told what to do, especially by civilians. But he saw the nurses watching. He saw the glares. He unclipped the key from his belt and unlocked the cuffs. One hand stays cuffed to the bed rail. Miller compromised, snapping the metal ring around the hospital bed's frame. As the doctors worked, popping the joint back into place with a sickening crunch that made Isaiah groan through his gritted teeth. Miller stepped out into the hallway to make a call. He didn't call his wife. He didn't call his partner. He called Sergeant Tom Graves. Graves was the watch commander, a 20-year veteran with a neck thick as a tree stump and a philosophy that the police department was a family, and the rest of the world was the enemy. "Sarge, we got a situation," Miller said, voice low, shielding his mouth with his hand. "What kind of situation?" Graves asked, his voice crackling with static. "I had a stop on 4th and Elm. Dark SUV matched the bolo on the liquor store robber. Driver was non-compliant, refused to exit. I had to extract him. Turns out he's a crip, wheelchair guy." There was a long silence on the other end. "Did you rough him up?" "He fell, Sarge. He was fighting me, reaching for my belt, and he fell out of the car when I tried to secure him. But here's the thing. He's making noise, screaming about being a vet, playing the victim card." "Is the camera footage solid?" Graves asked, the golden question. "Yeah," Miller lied, feeling a bead of sweat roll down his spine. I turned it off after he was secured to save battery. Standard procedure, but the extraction, it might look rough to a civilian." He went face first. "Write it up," Graves said, his tone shifting to the mechanical cadence of the cover-up. "The report is everything. Cliff, use the buzzwords. Furrowed brow. Clenched fists. Target glance at weapon. Passive resistance turned active. If you write it right, the video doesn't matter. The video is 2D. Your perception is 3D. We back our own. Just get the report in before his lawyer gets loud." "Thanks, Sarge." Miller hung up. He felt better. The blue wall was rising. He walked back into the trauma bay, pulled out his notepad, and began to draft the fiction that would ruin a man's life. Subject Isaiah Washington. Charges felony assault on a police officer, resisting arrest, obstruction of justice, failure to obey a lawful order. He looked at Isaiah, who was now sedated, sleeping fitfully with his arm in a sling. Miller felt no remorse. In his mind, Isaiah had brought this on himself by not opening the door fast enough. 3 days later. The story was barely a blip. The local police blotter listed the arrest Isaiah Washington, 42, arrested for assaulting an officer during a traffic stop. No mention of the wheelchair, no mention of the paralysis, just a name and a crime. Ruth Washington sat in the waiting room of the Montgomery County Jail. She was a woman of immense grace, a retired school teacher with silver hair and eyes that could spot a lie from across a classroom. She had been crying for 3 days, but now the tears were gone. They had been replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She had tried to see Isaiah, but they claimed he was being processed or was in medical observation. They were stalling. She pulled out her phone and dialed the number she had been given by a friend at the VA. Cole, Sterling and Associates, a receptionist answered. "How can I help you?" "I need to speak to Harrison Cole," Ruth said. "Tell him it's about a Silver Star recipient who is currently being held in county jail for falling out of his wheelchair." 10 seconds later. Harrison Cole was on the line. Harrison Cole was a legend in the state. He was a civil rights attorney who dressed like a GQ model and litigated like a pit bull. He had made his name suing insurance companies that denied cancer treatments, but his passion was police misconduct. "Mrs. Washington," Cole's voice was smooth, baritone, and instantly reassuring. "Tell me everything." She did. She told him about the traffic stop. She told him about the phone call Isaiah had made to her from the hospital, his voice slurred from painkillers, telling her he thought he was going to die on that pavement. "I'll meet you at the jail in 20 minutes, Cole said. And Mrs. Washington, don't sign anything. Don't let them make you sign anything." When Harrison Cole walked into the jail, the atmosphere changed. The desk sergeant stiffened. They knew him, they hated him, and they feared him. "I'm here to see my client, Isaiah Washington," Cole said, slapping a thick leather briefcase onto the counter. "And if he isn't in a visitation room in 5 minutes, I will have a federal judge on the phone before you can finish your donut." They brought Isaiah out. He looked terrible. His face was scraped raw, one eye swollen shut. He was in a jail-issue wheelchair that was 2 sizes too small, his legs dragging slightly on the floor. Cole listened to Isaiah's story. He took notes in a rapid, shorthand scrawl. He stopped when Isaiah got to the part about the body camera. "He leaned down," Isaiah said, his voice trembling with rage. "He tapped the camera twice. The light went out. Then he whispered in my ear. He told me if I talked, he'd plant drugs in my car. He told me he'd bury me." Cole stopped writing. He looked up, his eyes narrowing. "He turned it off before he threatened you." "Yes." The light went red to black. Cole leaned back in his chair, a shark-like grin spreading across his face. "Cliff Miller, I know him. He's arrogant. He's sloppy. He thinks the off button means delete." "What do you mean?" Isaiah asked. "I mean," Cole said, closing his notebook. "Officer Miller just handed us the keys to the kingdom. But first, we need to secure the evidence before technical difficulties erase it." Cole left the jail and went straight to the courthouse. He filed a preservation letter, demanding the immediate sequestration of all body cam footage, dash cam footage, and radio logs related to the arrest. But the police were ahead of him. The next morning, the official police statement was released. During a routine traffic stop involving a robbery suspect, the individual, identified as Isaiah Washington, became belligerent and physically aggressive. When asked to exit the vehicle, the suspect lunged at the officer, resulting in both parties falling to the ground. Officer Miller followed protocol to secure the suspect. Internal Affairs has reviewed the incident and found no violation of policy. Lunged. Cole read the statement aloud in his office, tossing the paper onto his mahogany desk. A man with no core muscles lunged. "They're circling the wagons," his paralegal, a sharp young woman named Jessica, said. "They denied the FOIA request, claiming ongoing investigation." "Of course they are," Cole muttered. "They need time to cook the books." Then, the miracle happened. It didn't come from the courts. It didn't come from the police. It came from a 14-year-old girl named Sarah Jenkins. Sarah had been sitting on that footage for days, terrified. She had seen the police on the news. She had heard them call the man a criminal. But she couldn't sleep. She kept seeing the way the officer had yanked him. It didn't look like a lunge. It looked like a rag doll being thrown. She created a burner account on TikTok. She uploaded the video with the caption hashtag Justice for Zeke. This is what really happened on Elm Street. The video was shaky. It was shot through window blinds. But the angle was high. You could clearly see the Ford Explorer. You could see Isaiah's hands on the wheel. You could see Miller rip the door open. And crucially, you could see the physics. You could see Miller plant his feet, grab Isaiah, and heave. You could see Isaiah's body go limp, not tense. You could see him tumble out, his legs getting caught, his face hitting the ground. It was brutal. It was undeniable. Within 4 hours, the video had 100,000 views. Within 12 hours, it had 2 million. The hashtag wheelchair veteran began to trend on Twitter/X. The local news stations picked it up. The police phones began to ring off the hook. Cole was in his office when Jessica burst in, holding her iPad. "Boss, you need to see this." Cole watched the footage. He watched it 3 times. "That's it," he whispered. "That's the leverage." He didn't wait. He called a press conference on the steps of the courthouse for 2:00 p.m. that day. The reporters swarmed. Cole stood next to Ruth Washington, who held a picture of Isaiah in his dress blues, the silver star pinned to his chest. "The Dayton Police Department lied," Cole announced, his voice booming without a microphone. "They claimed my client lunged. They claimed he was a threat. Today, the world saw the truth. Officer Cliff Miller didn't arrest a criminal. He assaulted a hero." He paused for effect, looking directly into the news cameras. "But we know there is more. We know Officer Miller turned off his body camera to threaten my client. And we know that the Dayton PD uses Axon Body 3 cameras." Cole smiled, a dangerous, predatory smile. For those who don't know, those cameras have a 60-second post-event buffer, even when you turn them off. They keep watching for a minute. We are demanding the raw logs. Not the edited clip the chief saw, the raw logs. And if we don't get them by noon tomorrow, we will sue this city for every dime it has. Inside the precinct, the mood had shifted from arrogant to panicked. Chief O'Malley sat in his office, the video playing on loop on his computer screen. Sergeant Graves stood in front of the desk, looking pale. "You told me he lunged, Tom," O'Malley said, his voice dangerously quiet. "That's what Miller said," Graves stammered. I trusted his report. And the body cam? O'Malley asked. The lawyer is talking about buffers. Did Miller say anything about what he did after he cut the feed? Graves swallowed hard. He said he secured the suspect. Get it down here, O'Malley barked. I want that footage pulled from the cloud server now. I want to see exactly what Miller thought he was hiding. Down in the server room, a tech named Kevin pulled up the file. The system automatically uploaded all footage to the cloud when the cameras were docked at the end of a shift. Even if a user deleted a file locally, the audit trail remained. And the buffers the silent video captured after the stop button was pressed were often overlooked by officers who didn't understand the tech. Kevin clicked the file Miller_C_2209.mp4. The video played, the shaking camera, the ground, the view of Isaiah's face in the dirt. Then, Miller's hand reached up. The red light indicator on the screen vanished. The audio cut out instantly, but the video kept rolling. It was silent, ghostly footage. The camera angle shifted as Miller leaned down. The lens was inches from Isaiah's ear. You couldn't hear the words, but you could see Miller's face. His lips were moving. His expression wasn't fear. It wasn't professional. It was a sneer. He looked like a predator toying with food. Then, Miller stood up. He looked around the empty street. He smirked, a distinct, self-satisfied smirk. He checked his watch. He kicked the wheel of Isaiah's wheelchair, sending it spinning into the gutter. It was only 10 seconds of silent footage, but it destroyed the fear for safety. Defense instantly. A man in fear doesn't smirk. A man in fear doesn't kick a wheelchair. Chief O'Malley watched the silent footage. He closed his eyes and rubbed his temples. He knew the department was done. Suspend him, O'Malley whispered. With pay? Graves asked. No, O'Malley said, opening his eyes. Without, and call the district attorney. Tell him we might have a problem with the Washington case. But Harrison Cole wasn't waiting for the DA. He was preparing a federal civil rights lawsuit, specifically citing deprivation of rights under color of law. And he had one more card to play. He knew that the buffer usually didn't have audio, but he also knew that Isaiah's car, a modern Ford Explorer, had a dash system that recorded cabin audio when the emergency SOS was triggered. And when Isaiah fell, the impact had triggered the car's silent distress signal. Cole just needed to get the car back from the police impound. The legal battle for the 2018 Ford Explorer was harder than the battle for Isaiah's freedom. The Dayton Police Department had impounded the vehicle as evidence in an ongoing felony investigation. In reality, they were holding it hostage. It was sitting in the impound lot, baking in the Ohio sun, gathering dust. Harrison Cole knew exactly why. He suspected that the car held more than just Isaiah's wheelchair. He suspected it held the truth. They're stalling, Harrison, Ruth Washington said. Pacing in Cole's office. It had been 2 weeks. Isaiah was out on bail thanks to a GoFundMe campaign that raised $50,000 in 4 hours, but the charges still hung over his head. He was at home, depressed, refusing to leave his bedroom. The shame of the arrest, the viral video of him dragging himself on the ground. It had broken something in him that the war hadn't. I know, Cole said, staring out the window at the courthouse across the street. They claim they need to process it for narcotics. They claim they need to search for hidden compartments. It's a stall tactic to drain our resources and force a plea deal. A plea deal? Ruth stopped pacing. My husband will not plead guilty to assaulting a police officer. He would rather rot in prison. And he won't have to, Cole said, turning around, because I just got a call from a friend at Ford. A telematics engineer. Cole sat on the edge of his desk. Ruth, does Isaiah pay for the safe and smart package on his Explorer? Ruth frowned. Yes. He's obsessed with safety. He pays for everything, the navigation, the emergency assist, the Wi-Fi hotspot. Cole grinned. Perfect. See, when a modern car detects a significant impact like, say, a 200-pound man falling against the door frame hard enough to dent it, the sensors wake up. Ruth's eyes went wide. The police have the car, Cole said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. But they don't have the cloud. The data isn't in the dashboard. Ruth, it's on a server in Michigan. Cole filed an emergency subpoena to Ford Motor Company that afternoon. The wording was specific request for all telematics data, including cabin audio and crash sensor logs. For VIN number 1, FM5K8. For the date of July 14th, Ford, having no loyalty to the Dayton Police Department and fearing a PR nightmare involving a disabled veteran, complied within 48 hours. When the file arrived in Cole's email, he didn't open it immediately. He called his entire team into the conference room. He hooked his laptop up to the projector. If this is what I think it is, Cole said, his finger hovering over the play button, Officer Miller is going to wish he had never been born. He clicked play. The audio was crystal clear. The high-quality microphone in the ceiling console, designed to hear voice commands over road noise, had picked up everything. 00005. The hum of the engine, the soft jazz music playing, the sound of the window rolling down. 0006, Miller's voice, muffled slightly by distance but distinct. Open the door. Last warning. 0008. The sound of the lock clicking. 0009. The violent whoosh of the door being ripped open. 0010. The sickening sound of fabric tearing and a grunt of exertion from Miller. 0011. Isaiah's voice, screaming. I can't walk! I can't walk! Look at my legs. 0013. A loud thud. The impact. The sensors had registered a lateral G-force spike of 4.2. That was the sound of Isaiah hitting the door frame and the ground. Then, silence for 3 seconds. 0017, Miller's voice, now panting, terrifyingly close as he leaned into the car to grab the handcuffs. Stop resisting, or 0019. Isaiah's voice, weak and pained. I'm not resisting. I'm paralyzed. 0023. And then, the smoking gun. The audio that wasn't on the body cam. The audio that Miller thought vanished into the ether when he turned off his camera. Miller's voice, a low, hateful whisper. You listened to me. You fell. You tried to fight me, and you fell. If you say anything else, I'll find something in that car that puts you away for 10 years. I'll find a kilo of whatever I want to find. Do you understand me, hero? The room went silent. Jessica, the paralegal, covered her mouth. Cole didn't smile this time. His face was a mask of cold fury. This wasn't just police brutality anymore. It was deprivation of rights, witness intimidation, filing a false report, and conspiracy. Burn it to a disk, Cole said softly. Make 10 copies. Send one to the district attorney. Send one to the Department of Justice. And send one to the governor. What about the press? Jessica asked. No, Cole said. Not yet. We're going to let Miller take the stand. We're going to let him lie under oath. We're going to let him dig his own grave so deep that he'll never climb out. The trial of State of Ohio versus... Isaiah Washington was supposed to be a formality. The district attorney, a man named Marcus Sterling, who had political aspirations and needed the police union's endorsement, was pushing hard for a conviction. He offered a plea deal, 1 year of probation, and a $500 fine for disorderly conduct. Isaiah refused. "We go to trial," Isaiah told Cole. "I want the world to see him." The courtroom was packed. Veterans from all over the state had come, filling the back rows in their VFW hats and leather vests. The blue wall was there too, rows of uniformed officers sitting behind Miller, staring down the defense table. Miller took the stand on the second day. He looked confident. He had shaved his head, wore a crisp suit, and spoke with the polite, practiced diction of a seasoned testifier. "Officer Miller," the DA asked, "can you describe the events of July 14th? "Yes, sir," Miller said, turning to the jury. "I initiated a traffic stop on a vehicle matching a bolo description. The driver was uncooperative. He refused to show his hands. When I opened the door to extract him for officer safety, he lunged at me. He grabbed for my duty belt. In the ensuing struggle, we both fell. I utilized the minimum amount of force necessary to secure him." "Did you threaten the defendant?" "Absolutely not," Miller said, looking insulted. "I acted professionally at all times, and the body camera, it malfunctioned." Miller lied smoothly. "The battery was low. It cut out right after the suspect was secured." "Thank you, officer." Harrison Cole stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket. He walked slowly to the podium. He didn't look at his notes. He looked at Miller. "Officer Miller," Cole began, his voice friendly, almost conversational. "You said my client lunged at you. You are aware he is a T4 paraplegic, correct?" "I am aware now," Miller said, "but at the moment, I didn't know. Adrenaline takes over." "Right, adrenaline. And you said you never threatened him." "Never. You never told him you would plant drugs in his car." Miller chuckled. A few officers in the gallery laughed with him. "That's absurd. That sounds like something from a movie. Counselor. I would never say that." "And you're sure the camera malfunctioned?" "Yes, technical glitch." Cole nodded. He walked back to his table and picked up a small flash drive. He held it up for the jury to see. "Your Honor," Cole said, his voice hardening like concrete setting. "The defense would like to introduce Defense Exhibit G into evidence. This is the authenticated telematics audio recording from the defendant's vehicle. Time stamped to the exact second of the arrest." Miller's smile faltered. He shifted in his seat. He looked at the prosecutor, who looked confused. "Objection," the DA shouted. "We haven't seen this." "Actually," Cole countered, "we sent a copy to your office 3 days ago as part of discovery. Perhaps it got lost in your inbox, along with the integrity of this case." The judge, a stern woman named Judge Howell, who had zero patience for games, peered over her glasses. "Overruled. Play the tape." The courtroom was dead silent. The clerk plugged in the drive. The audio played over the high-quality courtroom speakers. The sound of the struggle filled the room. The scream of, "I can't walk," echoed off the mahogany walls. The jury flinched at the sound of the impact, and then Miller's voice filled the room. "If you say anything else, I'll find something in that car that puts you away for 10 years. I'll find a kilo of whatever I want to find." Miller's face went white. Not pale, ghost white. The blood drained from his head so fast he looked like he might faint. He gripped the railing of the witness stand, his knuckles turning white. The officers in the gallery stopped smirking. They looked at each other. Then, slowly, one by one, they began to look down at their shoes. The blue wall was crumbling. Cole let the silence hang for a long, agonizing moment after the tape ended. "Officer Miller," Cole said, his voice barely a whisper, yet audible to everyone. "Is that your voice?" Miller opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at the DA, who was now furiously scribbling on a notepad, refusing to make eye contact. He looked at the judge, whose expression was one of pure, unadulterated disgust. I, Miller stammered. "Is that your voice?" Cole roared, slamming his hand on the railing. "Yes," Miller whispered. "No further questions," Cole said, turning his back on the witness. The cross-examination was over, but the destruction wasn't. Judge Howell leaned forward. "Mr. Sterling," she said to the prosecutor, "I suggest you look very carefully at the charges in this case, because right now, the only criminal I see in this courtroom is the man on the witness stand." The DA stood up, looking defeated. "Your Honor, the state moves to dismiss all charges against Isaiah Washington with prejudice." "Granted." Judge Howell banged her gavel. "And Officer Miller, do not leave this building. I am holding you in contempt of court for perjury. Bailiff, take him into custody." The sound of the handcuffs clicking onto Cliff Miller's wrists was the sweetest sound Isaiah Washington had ever heard. The courtroom erupted. The veterans in the back row cheered. Ruth wept openly, hugging Isaiah's neck. But Cole wasn't celebrating. He was watching Miller being led away. He knew this wasn't the end. The dismissal of charges was just the appetizer. The civil suit, and the federal criminal charges that were sure to follow, would be the main course. As Miller was walked past the defense table, he looked at Isaiah. There was no arrogance left, only fear, pure animal fear. Isaiah looked up at him, his face calm. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply nodded. "Karma," Isaiah said softly. "It's a slow wheel, but it grinds fine." Cliff Miller thought the worst was over. He had lost his job. He had been humiliated in the local press. He spent 3 nights in county jail for contempt of court before his union lawyer, a sweaty man named Frank D'Amico, got him out on bail. Miller sat in his living room, staring at the wall, convincing himself that he could bounce back. He'd move to a different state, maybe Florida or Texas. He'd get a job in private security. He'd be a cop again in a few years when the heat died down. That was how it always worked. He was wrong. The video of Isaiah Washington, a paralyzed black veteran being dragged from his car, had not just gone viral in Dayton. It had gone global. It had been viewed 45 million times. It had been retweeted by senators, celebrities, and 4-star generals. The Department of Justice doesn't care about local police unions. They don't care about the blue wall. 2 weeks after the state charges were dismissed against Isaiah, a black suburban SUV pulled up to Miller's house. 2 agents in windbreakers with bright yellow FBI lettering stepped out. They didn't knock. They pounded. When Miller opened the door, he wasn't met with the professional courtesy he used to extend to other officers. He was met with a federal warrant. "Clifford James Miller," Agent Ross said, holding up the paper. "You are under arrest for deprivation of rights under color of law, witness tampering, and filing false federal reports. Turn around." Miller was marched out in his sweatpants, handcuffed in front of his neighbors. This time, there was no covering the camera lens. The news helicopters were already circling. The federal trial, United States versus Miller was a bloodbath. The prosecution, led by a fierce U.S. attorney named Sarah Vance, didn't just use the car audio. They dug deeper. They subpoenaed Miller's phone records. They found the text messages to Sergeant Graves. "Wheelchair guy is making noise. Need to bury this. Make sure the report matches my narrative." They found the deleted draft of the arrest report, where Miller had initially written "suspect fell" before changing it to "suspect lunged." But the most damning testimony came from Miller's own partner, Officer Ben Garrett. Garrett had been in the second car that arrived on the scene. He had stayed silent during the internal investigation, terrified of being labeled a rat, but facing federal obstruction charges of his own. Garrett flipped. "Cliff told me in the locker room," Garrett testified, refusing to look at Miller. He said, "I messed up. Ben, I pulled the guy out too hard. But if we stick to the story that he reached for my gun, we're good. Nobody believes a junkie over a badge." "And did you believe Mr. Washington was a junkie?" U.S. Attorney Vance asked. "No, Mom," Garrett whispered. "He was a Silver Star recipient. We all knew by then. But Cliff said, he said it didn't matter who he was. It mattered who controlled the paperwork." The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts, the sentencing hearing was the final nail in the coffin. In federal court, there is no parole. You serve 85% of your time. Judge Harrison, a silver-haired jurist known as the Hammer, looked down at Miller. Miller stood in an orange jumpsuit, looking smaller, softer. The gym muscles had deflated. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the hollow, 1,000-yard stare of a man who knows his life is over. "Mr. Miller," Judge Harrison said, his voice echoing in the silent courtroom. "You took an oath to protect and serve. Instead, you prayed and destroyed. You looked at a man who gave his legs for this country, and you saw an opportunity to exercise petty, tyrannical power. You turned off your camera because you knew you were doing evil. You are not a police officer. You are a criminal with a badge." The judge paused, looking at the sentencing guidelines. "For the count of deprivation of rights resulting in bodily injury, and for the count of witness tampering involving a federal investigation, I sentence you to 240 months in federal prison. 20 years. Miller's knees buckled. He grabbed the table for support. His wife, sitting in the back row, didn't cry. She just stood up, took off her wedding ring, put it in her purse, and walked out of the courtroom. She filed for divorce the next morning, while Cliff Miller was being processed into F.C.I. Elkton, a low-security federal prison that would soon feel like a very small box. Isaiah Washington was busy rebuilding. The civil lawsuit against the city of Dayton and the police department didn't go to trial. The city attorneys knew they would be annihilated. They settled $12.5 million. It was the largest police misconduct settlement in the state's history. But the hard karma wasn't just about money. It was about legacy. Isaiah didn't buy a yacht. He didn't buy a mansion in the hills. He bought the old, abandoned textile factory on the west side of Dayton, the same neighborhood Miller used to patrol like a tyrant. He gutted it. He hired architects who specialized in universal design. He hired contractors who were veterans. 6 months later, the ribbon was cut on the Washington Veteran Empowerment Center. It was a state-of-the-art facility. It had a fully accessible gym for paralyzed vets. It had a legal clinic staffed by Harrison Cole's firm Pro Bono to help vets fight for their benefits. It had a mental health wing, and most importantly, it had a job training program that taught coding, engineering and robotics on opening day. The press was there, but this time they weren't reporting on a tragedy. They were reporting on a triumph. Isaiah rolled up to the podium in a new, titanium frame wheelchair. He looked strong. The stress lines were gone from his face. Ruth stood beside him, beaming. "They tried to break me," Isaiah told the crowd. "They tried to take my dignity on the side of that road. They thought that because I couldn't walk, I couldn't stand up. But they forgot one thing." He pointed to the American flag waving above the building. "A soldier never stops fighting. He just changes the battlefield." The karma hit even harder a year later. Cliff Miller was sitting in the common room of the federal prison, watching the news on a small, caged TV. He was sweeping floors for 12 cents an hour. His family had stopped visiting. His appeals had been denied. On the screen, a news anchor was interviewing the Person of the Year. It was Isaiah Washington. "Mr. Washington," the anchor said, "your program has reduced veteran homelessness in Dayton by 80%. You've given hundreds of men and women their lives back. What drives you?" Isaiah smiled on the screen. It was a genuine, warm smile. "I think about the people who tried to stop me," Isaiah said. "I think about the darkness they tried to put me in, and I realized darkness is just a canvas for light. If it wasn't for that traffic stop, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have the resources to help all these people. So, in a way, I'm thankful. The man who tried to bury me actually planted me." Miller watched the screen, his broom in his hand. The other inmates were listening. "Hey, new guy!" A large inmate named Marcus shouted at Miller. "Ain't that the guy you tossed out the car?" Miller didn't answer. He just stared at the screen, watching the man he paralyzed building an empire of hope, while he rotted in a cage of his own making. Isaiah Washington had turned his pain into power. Cliff Miller had turned his power into a prison, and that was the truest justice of all. The story of Isaiah Washington is a stark reminder that authority without accountability is tyranny. Cliff Miller believed his badge was a shield that would protect him from the consequences of his cruelty. He believed that a disabled black man in a wheelchair was an easy target, a voiceless victim who would crumble under the weight of the system. He underestimated the power of the truth. He underestimated the resilience of a man who had already survived war. And most of all, he underestimated the camera, the silent, unblinking eye that strips away the lies and reveals the character underneath. Justice isn't always swift. It took months of pain, fear, and fighting, but when it arrived, it was absolute. Isaiah didn't just win a lawsuit, he won his life back. He proved that dignity is not something that can be given or taken by a police officer. It is inherent. And while Miller sits in a cell counting the days of a 20-year sentence, Isaiah Washington is out in the world, making every single day count. And that is the incredible true-to-life story of how one corrupt officer's arrogance led to his total destruction and the rise of a true American hero. It's a powerful lesson in why we must always hold those in power accountable and why we should never, ever give up fighting for the truth. If this story moved you, if you believe in justice for our veterans, please do me a huge favor, smash that like button right now. It helps get this story out to more people. Share this video with a friend who needs to see real karma in action. And if you haven't already, subscribe and hit the bell notification. I post powerful stories like this every week, and you do not want to miss the next one. What do you think, did 20 years in prison fit the crime, or should Officer Miller have gotten life? Let me know your verdict in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.